The gym had become my ritual, my quiet escape from everything that existed outside its clean, echoing walls. I went there not to transform, but to maintain, to keep the slow tide of age from dragging me further from the woman I once was. Same time, same place, same machine. The treadmill third from the left had practically molded to the shape of my body over the past year. I liked the predictability of it, the rhythm of it, the control. My life outside felt like shifting ground sometimes, but in here, every beep, every step, every drop of sweat made sense. It was during one of those mornings, gray, forgettable, uneventful, that I noticed her, a figure I hadn't seen before. She stepped onto the treadmill beside mine, the fourth from the left, her movements fluid, her confidence quiet but undeniable. I barely looked at her at first, just a flicker of awareness in my periphery. But when she began to match my pace, stride for stride, incline for incline, I felt something shift in the air between us, a mirrored rhythm that felt too exact to be coincidence. At first, I told myself it was nothing. People often unconsciously fall into the tempo of those around them. But the next day, she was there again, and the next, always arriving a few minutes after me, always choosing the same treadmill, always beginning her run just as I began mine. There was no conversation, no acknowledgement, just this wordless synchronization that tightened something low and slow in my stomach. She had a way of moving that was impossible not to notice. Her body was taut, but not stiff. There was a looseness in her form that suggested control, not carelessness. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, strands escaping in soft curls around her face. She wore leggings that clung to every muscle, and her tops were always slightly oversized, the sleeves rolled halfway up her forearms. She didn't seem to care who was watching, which made it even harder not to watch. Her presence began to unravel the comfort of my routine. I became hyper-aware of my own movements. I started dressing differently, choosing bras that gave a subtle lift, tank tops that showed just enough shoulder. I adjusted my playlist, wanting songs that made me feel younger, more alive. I began to linger in the locker room longer than necessary, wondering if I might catch a glimpse of her towel-draped form disappearing into the steam of the showers. Each morning, I arrived with anticipation coiled beneath my skin, pretending to ignore her while secretly counting the seconds until she stepped onto the machine beside mine. She rarely looked at me directly, but when she did, the glance held. It wasn't long or deliberate, but it wasn't neutral either. It was the kind of glance that left something behind. Once, during a cool-down, her hand brushed against mine as we reached for our water bottles. It was nothing, a touch so light it could have been accidental, but it left a scorch across my knuckles that lingered long after she walked away. I found myself retracing the moment in my head for hours, wondering if she felt it too. I started arriving a little earlier, just to see if she would follow. She always did. No words, no smiles, just proximity and movement. The space between us never widened. It pulsed with something I didn't yet understand but couldn't ignore. One morning, she stretched beside me on the mats, her body folding forward until her forehead touched her knees. The curve of her spine was a study in intention. I tried not to stare. My own stretches were distracted, imprecise. She shifted into a lunge, and her gaze flicked to mine in the mirror, brief, unguarded, and then gone. I felt my breath stutter in my throat. Something in that moment confirmed what I had been afraid to name. She became the unspoken center of my routine. I rearranged errands, skipped breakfast, left meetings early just to make sure I wouldn't miss her. It wasn't about exercise anymore. It hadn't been for a while. My workouts became a choreography of glances, gestures, and tension too thick to call accidental. I memorized the sound of her footsteps, the way she adjusted the volume on her headphones, how she always wiped her brow with the same folded corner of her towel. At home, I thought of her. In the shower, I imagined her scent in the steam. At night, I played scenes in my head. Her walking behind me, her voice soft in my ear, her fingers brushing my bare skin as if they had the right. None of it had happened, and yet it felt more vivid than most of what did. I had not touched her. I had not spoken to her. But something between us had already begun. Something that grew louder in the silence, stronger in the repetition. She wasn't just a girl at the gym anymore. She was the tremor beneath my calm, the skipped beat in my measured life, the heat rising with every step we took, together but apart. And though I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, I knew I had already stepped over some invisible line the moment I started to hope she would be there again tomorrow. There was a shift I couldn't explain, a subtle distortion in the air between us that began to throb just beneath the surface of each morning. I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was simply projecting desires onto a stranger who happened to run beside me. But that theory started to unravel with every passing day. It wasn't just the way she matched my pace now. It was the way she seemed to echo me, shadow me. She always arrived just after me, always selected the machine next to mine, always adjusted her incline when I did. But what struck me more than the synchronicity was the way she occupied space. She didn't just use the treadmill, she claimed it. And in doing so, she claimed me in small, imperceptible increments. Her scent began to haunt me, faint and clean, something citrusy laced with sweat. I started noticing when she came straight from the street, a cold edge in her hair, or when her skin glistened slightly from a warm-up. I caught glimpses of the curve of her jaw in the mirror, the defined line of her collarbone beneath the neckline of her shirt. Her movements were unhurried and precise, like she understood how her body moved through the world and was utterly comfortable in that knowledge. It was different for me. I had spent years compartmentalizing, tucking things into boxes: desire, risk, danger, impulse. I'd built a life on routine, responsibility, and predictability. But she was an interruption. A beautiful, wordless disruption to the order I had relied on. And what disturbed me the most was not her presence. It was how much I wanted her to stay. In the locker room, I began to delay. I'd time my routine so that I'd be changing when she was. I studied the way she moved, the stretch of her arms as she lifted her shirt, the shadowed sliver of bare skin that flashed above her waistband. She never seemed to rush. She folded her towel with care, unwrapped her ponytail slowly, twisted it back into place with a loose, practiced hand. Every gesture of hers was unhurried, unconcerned. I watched her through my lashes, terrified of being caught and yet craving that exact moment. One morning, the distance between us collapsed entirely. I had just stepped off the treadmill, heart still pounding, skin hot and damp. She was behind me, so close that I could feel the heat radiating from her body. I reached for my towel and her arm brushed mine. It was nothing, a fleeting graze of skin, but the sensation sparked down my side like a lit match dropped in dry grass. I didn't flinch. I froze. The warmth of her lingered on my skin long after the contact ended. It kept happening. Little things. She'd pass by me in the weight area, fingers brushing my lower back in a motion that could have been accidental. She'd lean in closer than necessary when stretching beside me on the mats, her breath brushing my shoulder like a secret. Once, I bent to tie my shoe and felt the air shift behind me, then the unmistakable sensation of her eyes trailing down the curve of my back. I didn't need to turn around to confirm it. I felt it. I knew. She never looked away when I caught her watching. There was no embarrassment, no apology. Her gaze was steady, open, deliberate. Not challenging, but not coy either. It was something else entirely, an offering, or maybe a warning. And I couldn't stop returning to her, even when I told myself to ignore it, even when I promised that I wouldn't linger, wouldn't look, wouldn't hope. She pulled my attention like gravity, and I gave in every time. The control I prided myself on began to erode. I started to alter my path in the gym just to pass her by. I adjusted my speed to fall in line with hers. I found excuses to be near her, to feel the electric field of her body brush up against mine in ways no one else noticed. My thoughts began to spiral outside the gym. I would find myself pausing at red lights, her face rising behind my closed eyelids. At night, I would lay awake, the hum of her nearness echoing in my ears. I'd replay every detail, how her skin looked under fluorescent lights, how her calves flexed when she moved from one machine to another, how her lips curled when she wiped sweat from her brow. I memorized her without meaning to. At home, I caught myself undressing with her in mind. I would look at my reflection in the mirror and imagine her standing behind me, close enough to feel her breath on my neck. I traced my own collarbone and wondered if her fingers would follow the same line. My hand would drift downward, and I would tell myself it was just a fantasy, just something fleeting. But it never felt fleeting. It felt inevitable. It was madness, I told myself. She was young, too young. This couldn't be real. And yet, the moments kept building. The silence between us grew louder, more defined, more intimate than any spoken word could have been. Every shared space, every glance held too long, every accidental touch, they were messages, layered and deliberate, a slow burn with no flame, but plenty of heat. I began to question what I was to her. Was she playing? Was this a game? Or did she feel it too? The tension, the pull, the promise? I didn't know. But I was past the point of retreat. I had already stepped too close to the edge, and now I was hovering there, breathless, waiting for her to give me one more sign. Just one. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand shift, no moment I could point to and say, this is where everything changed. It was more like a dimmer switch being turned slowly, imperceptibly, until the light in the room was something entirely different from what it had been. The dynamic between us had been simmering for weeks, but now the temperature had risen just enough to alter the air between us. She was no longer just a girl who worked out beside me. She had become something else, an extension of my awareness, a pulse I could feel beneath my skin even when she wasn't touching me. She started following me, not in a dramatic way, but deliberately. If I moved to the free weights, she was there within moments. If I wandered to the mats, she settled beside me with a foam roller or resistance bands, pretending not to notice me even as her body angled closer. It was always subtle, calculated, but it was unmistakable. I knew she was watching, mirroring, testing the limits of how far she could go before I broke the silence that still stretched between us. The first time she moved into my space, truly invaded it, was during a cool down. I was lying on the mat, stretching my hamstrings, legs bent, arms overhead, when she slid down beside me, so close our elbows touched. Her thigh brushed mine as she reached forward, folding her body effortlessly. I felt the heat of her skin through both our leggings, and I couldn't breathe. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. My body had already memorized hers. After that, she stopped pretending. The accidental touches became intentional. She let her fingers graze my lower back when passing behind me. Her hand lingered on my shoulder after adjusting a shared towel on the bench. She stood close enough behind me during squats that I could feel the breath from her nose against my neck. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Every move she made was language. Every glance, punctuation. I found myself performing. I started choosing tops that clung tighter to my chest, leggings that accentuated the curve of my hips. I shaved more carefully, moisturized more often, sprayed perfume lightly behind my ears before leaving the house, as if expecting someone to lean in and breathe me in. I told myself it was nothing, a harmless indulgence, but each time her body passed within inches of mine, something in me lit up like dry grass catching fire. There was a day we were the only ones in the stretching corner. She rolled onto her side facing me, propping her head up on one hand while pretending to hold a pose. Her foot nudged mine lightly, and I froze. She didn't move it away. She held the contact there, barely perceptible, a single point of electricity pressing into my arch. I didn't pull back. My body had begun to respond to her in ways I couldn't control. My breath caught in my throat, and warmth flooded my face, my chest, my thighs. She smiled then, not at me, but in that detached, knowing way that made me feel unwrapped. Every interaction began to feel like foreplay. The way she leaned in too close when reaching for weights, the slow drag of her towel across her neck, her chest, her stomach. She knew exactly what she was doing, and I was unraveling. My mind lived in two places, the disciplined present, where I lifted, jogged, stretched, and the fevered undercurrent, where her hand was always sliding up my side, where her breath was always against my skin. I began to anticipate her. I would walk into the gym and search for her figure, feel that wave of shallow relief when I saw her already there. The days she wasn't, I couldn't concentrate. My body went through the motions, but my mind wandered to places it had no business going. I would remember the curve of her back in downward dog, the slight sheen of sweat on her neck, the way her leggings stretched over the roundness of her ass when she leaned to pick up her water bottle. I was becoming obsessed. But it wasn't just physical. There was something else, something beneath the touches and the tension, a kind of dare, a challenge. She was testing the boundaries of what I could resist, and I was failing beautifully. I stopped leaving the gym right after workouts. I lingered near the showers, hoping for a glimpse of her bare shoulders as she disappeared behind a curtain of steam. I adjusted my post-gym errands till they might align with hers. I even changed which locker I used, choosing one closer to hers, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Then came the day she offered me a ride. It had been raining hard, the kind of relentless downpour that makes the world feel heavy and dim. I was standing by the window, contemplating whether I had the energy to sprint to my car, when she appeared beside me, holding her keys. She didn't speak, just held them out slightly, an eyebrow raised, her mouth tilted in that crooked, almost smile. I didn't even think. I nodded, followed her outside, and slid into the passenger seat of her car. The interior was warm, filled with the scent of her, citrus, sweat, and something more elusive. She drove in silence. The rain smeared against the windshield like a fogged memory. I kept my hands folded in my lap, gripping the hem of my jacket to stop them from shaking. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel, steady and slow. When she dropped me off, she didn't lean in, didn't touch me, but her eyes lingered. And when I stepped into my apartment, soaked and shivering, I realized I had forgotten my towel in her back seat. I waited 2 days before seeing her again. When I did, she had the towel draped casually over her gym bag. She said nothing, simply handed it to me. But her fingers brushed mine longer than necessary, and in her eyes there was a quiet hunger, restrained but undeniable. That touch replayed in my body all night. My skin pulsed with memory, my thighs clenched with need. She had not kissed me, She had not even spoken to me, and yet I felt possessed. I lay in bed that night, fingers between my legs, thinking of nothing but her. The way she moved, the way she looked at me, the heat of her body beside mine. And as I came, silently, face buried in the pillow, I realized I had already surrendered. I had switched modes. This was no longer curiosity or fantasy. It had become need, and there was no turning back. The rain had stopped by the time she dropped me off, but the air still held that damp heaviness, as if the world hadn't finished exhaling. My fingers were still tingling from the brief brush of her skin when she handed me my towel. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I didn't turn on the television. I just walked from room to room in my apartment, each step echoing with a kind of anticipation I didn't know how to soothe. I took a long shower, not because I needed to be clean, but because I wanted to remember the warmth of her presence in the car, the silent current running between us. The next morning at the gym, she was already there. She was on the treadmill beside mine, as always, but this time she didn't start running. She was stretching, long, slow, deliberate movements that made my pulse tick in odd rhythms. I stepped onto my treadmill and began my warm-up, eyes forward, pretending not to see her. But my body betrayed me. Every muscle felt taut, expectant, like it was waiting for her to touch me again. She eventually joined me, syncing her steps with mine, our strides so perfectly aligned that it felt choreographed. The energy between us was no longer subtle. It throbbed. She didn't brush against me by accident anymore. She touched me with intention, with awareness. Her fingertips grazed my wrist as we reached for our bottles. Her thigh pressed lightly against mine during stretches. Her breath landed on the back of my neck when we passed each other near the weights. Each moment stretched, lingered, reverberated through me long after it ended. I began to live for these tiny collisions. I was drowning in them. I didn't know how to name what was happening, only that it consumed me. My workouts became a haze. My heart raced before I even began to move. I'd lie awake at night, imagining her hands trailing across my stomach, her lips at my throat. I had never touched her the way I ached to, but I felt as though I already had. My body remembered things that had never happened, or hadn't yet. Then came the shift. We finished at the same time that day. She was behind me as we entered the locker room, our footsteps oddly in sync, her bag slung over her shoulder, mine clutched tightly in hand. I chose a bench further from the others, not caring who might see, only knowing I wanted space. She followed. She sat too close. I could feel the heat of her thigh through the thin fabric of my leggings. I changed slowly, every motion suddenly intimate. She undressed beside me without shame, her shirt slipping over her head in a single, fluid motion. Her back curved as she reached for her shoes, and I caught myself staring at the nape of her neck, the soft indent where her shoulder met her spine. She looked up once, caught my gaze, didn't look away. That night, I barely made it through dinner. I was trembling. I couldn't eat. I kept replaying the look in her eyes, the way she had moved beside me, as if our bodies already knew what came next. I went to bed early, but not to sleep. I stripped down and slid between the sheets, the air cool on my skin. My fingers moved without permission. I closed my eyes and saw her mouth hovering above mine, her hand gripping my hip. I imagined her tongue sliding against my neck, her voice rasping across my skin like silk. When I came, it was with her name stifled in my throat, my entire body arching into emptiness that only she could have filled. The next day, I skipped the gym. I told myself I needed rest, that my body was sore, but the truth was, I was terrified. I was afraid of what I would do if she came near me again, of what I would ask for with my eyes, what I might offer with my body. But the absence of her was worse. My apartment felt colder. My bed felt empty. My skin, untouched, buzzed with longing. I imagined her waiting, imagined her disappointed, imagined her brushing against someone else the way she had touched me. By the following morning, I couldn't stay away. I arrived early, earlier than usual. I warmed up alone, nervous energy pulsing beneath my skin like a second heartbeat. I wasn't sure she'd come. Maybe she'd sensed my retreat. Maybe she'd changed her routine. But then I saw her in the mirror, stepping onto the treadmill beside mine, as if she had always been there. No expression, no greeting, just presence. Immediate, full. We ran in silence. When we finished, she turned her head toward me. That was all. A single, deliberate glance that made my breath catch. I followed her into the stretching area, my limbs trembling in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. She didn't speak, didn't smile, just sat beside me and began to move, cat-cow, child's pose, twists that arched her back in ways I couldn't look away from. At one point, she leaned forward and her hand landed on my ankle. A stillness spread through me so complete I forgot to breathe. She didn't remove it. The contact was light, gentle, but it anchored me, rooted me to the floor. I didn't move. I didn't look at her, but I felt her eyes on me, not hungry, not demanding, just waiting. When I finally stood, her hand slid from my skin like a secret being withdrawn. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't glance back. I walked out of the gym into a world that now felt entirely different, louder, sharper, more unreal. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Coffee I didn't taste, conversations I couldn't follow. My body carried her touch like a ghost. Every nerve hummed. Every shadow held the shape of her silhouette. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew that something had started, something irreversible, something that lived in the breathless moments between her hand and my skin, between my restraint and her invitation, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could resist answering it. She started appearing in places that weren't the gym. At first, I thought it was coincidence. I saw her outside the cafe I visited every Sunday, standing in line in front of me, headphones in, tapping her fingers against her thigh to music I couldn't hear. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, but the space between us tightened, humming with something unspoken and deliberate. I watched the back of her neck, the soft arc where her spine disappeared beneath her hoodie, and said nothing. My hands trembled when I received my coffee, and I left before she turned around. The next week, she passed me in the grocery store, pushing a cart, her hair still damp, skin glowing as if she had just showered. I saw her before she saw me. Her gaze drifted across the shelves, fingers brushing produce, her mouth forming some silent tune. I didn't approach. I didn't even walk down the same aisle. But I watched her for longer than I should have, peering from behind a display of oranges, my heart knocking against my ribs like a drumbeat out of sync. It wasn't about curiosity anymore. It was obsession, carefully dressed in avoidance. Then, one night, she came to my building. There had been no messages, no notes, no exchanged numbers. Only the tether of glances and touches that lived in the margins of our daily choreography. I heard the buzzer around 7, a single chime that echoed through the empty space of my apartment. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there, damp from the light drizzle outside, hoodie clinging to her frame, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in without a word, like she had always belonged there, like the rules we had followed in the gym had melted on the pavement outside. She dropped her bag by the door and looked around, not like a guest surveying new space, but like someone reacquainting herself with something familiar. I stood frozen, my hands awkward at my sides, heart pounding with the kind of pressure that comes from knowing a dam is about to break. She peeled off her hoodie, revealing the thin straps of a sports bra and the smooth sheen of her skin. I couldn't look away. She didn't sit. She didn't ask. She just wandered slowly through the room, fingertips tracing the edge of my bookshelf, eyes drifting over framed photos on the wall, the flicker of a smirk curling her mouth when she passed my yoga mat rolled neatly in the corner. She touched everything like it had meaning, like she was cataloging parts of me through the objects I lived with. My apartment, once a space of control and routine, now pulsed with a strange electricity, reshaped by her presence. In the kitchen, she opened a cabinet and pulled down 2 glasses, filled them with water from the tap. She handed me one, her fingers grazing mine, and again, no words. Only the weight of her nearness, the slow, deliberate rhythm of her breathing. I sipped the water, though my mouth was dry, and she watched me as if she was trying to decide what to do with me. She stayed. She didn't ask to. She didn't need to. She simply remained. She took off her shoes and sat on the couch, legs folded beneath her. Then later stretched out with one hand behind her head, her shirt riding up to expose a sliver of toned abdomen. She looked so relaxed, so at ease in my space, that I found myself mimicking her posture without realizing it. Shoulders loosening, breath slowing, body bending toward her orbit. Time warped. The hours slipped past us in silence, and I felt her settle deeper into my space like ink into fabric. She left her water glass on the counter, her hoodie on the back of a chair. The next day, she texted. I don't remember ever exchanging numbers, but somehow she had mine. She asked nothing direct, just a single message. It's cold. Your floor is warmer. I said nothing, but I left the door unlocked. She came and went over the next week. She brought her things, small items at first, a charger, a toothbrush, a half-full bottle of lotion that appeared in my bathroom without comment, then a change of clothes, a pair of socks draped on the edge of my hamper, her favorite protein bar stacked beside mine in the cupboard. She started waking up in my bed. I never remembered the moment we moved there. We just did. I'd turn off the light and she'd follow. I'd wake up and find her hand resting on my hip, her breath warm against the back of my neck. There was no routine to her arrivals, no warning. She slipped into my life the way light filters through curtains, soft, slow, and impossible to ignore once you notice it. My apartment was no longer mine. It had become a shared space, reshaped around the architecture of her body. Her smell clung to my sheets. Her hair clogged the drain. Her laugh echoed off my walls, low and private and threaded with familiarity. She started answering my doorbell, checking my fridge, rearranging the spices in my kitchen. One evening, she folded my laundry, humming some tune I didn't recognize. When I thanked her, she didn't respond, just looked at me with that unreadable gaze that had once belonged only to our time at the gym. Now it lived here too, in my living room, my bathroom mirror, the pillow beside mine. I should have said something, set boundaries, drawn a line, but I didn't. I let her in again and again, because with every intrusion, she brought something I hadn't realized I was starving for. Her presence filled a space I had kept empty for too long. And though it terrified me, I wanted more. Even as the quiet unease settled into the corners, even as I noticed her watching me with an intensity that felt almost too focused, too knowing, I didn't stop her. I couldn't. I had let her in once. Now she was everywhere, and part of me wondered if I had ever truly locked the door at all. She was gone when I woke up. The sheets were still warm on her side, twisted and damp with sweat, and her scent lingered in the folds. Salt, citrus, and something unmistakably her. I lay there for a long time, not moving, my body still aching from the night before. My thighs were sore, my chest bruised with soft impressions from her mouth, and the skin at the base of my throat tingled where her teeth had marked me. The taste of her hadn't left my tongue. I could still feel the rhythm of her hips in my bones, like an aftershock that hadn't fully passed. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt paused, suspended in the glow of what had happened. Clothes were scattered on the floor, hers and mine mixed together in a careless path from the hallway to the bedroom. A towel half folded on the edge of the bed, the outline of her body still imprinted on the pillow beside me. I reached over, touched the dip where her head had rested, and closed my eyes. My fingers curled around the fabric, and I pressed it to my face, breathing her in. I didn't know if I wanted to cry or smile. I didn't do either. Eventually, I got up. My legs felt heavy, but there was a lightness in my chest, a strange, quiet bloom that hadn't existed before. The mirror caught me as I passed, and I paused to look. My skin was flushed, marked, my hair wild. There was something feral in the way I looked, disheveled, undone, real. I didn't smooth myself. I didn't fix anything. I just stood there, watching the woman I had become, the woman who had let another woman into her bed, her body, her life. I didn't recognize her fully, but I didn't fear her either. The kitchen was still. 2 glasses sat on the counter, one half full. Her sports bra hung from the back of a chair. She had made coffee. I could smell it, bitter and rich, filling the air like a reminder. I poured myself a cup and stood barefoot in the silence, sipping slowly, letting the warmth ground me. My phone was on the table. No messages, no missed calls, no notes, just the echo of her fingertips on my skin. The day moved forward, but I didn't. I showered, letting the water wash over me, rinsing away the sweat, but not the memory. I dressed slowly, deliberately, choosing softness, cotton against tender places, a loose sweater that draped over my collarbone where her lips had lingered. I left the bed unmade. I wanted to come back to it later and remember. When I finally stepped outside, the sun felt different, too bright, too casual. The world carried on as if nothing had shifted, but inside me, everything had. I walked without direction, her name looping silently through my mind like a prayer I didn't know how to stop saying. Every person I passed looked irrelevant, every sound distant. My body was still tuned to her, my rhythm altered, my breath no longer entirely my own. By evening, I was restless. I lit a candle, one she had commented on in passing a few days ago. The scent filled the room quickly, and I sat beside it, letting the flame flicker shadows across my walls. I thought of the way her hand had pressed flat against my stomach, how her thumb had circled just beneath my ribs as her mouth traveled lower. I remembered the sound she made when I pulled her shirt over her head, the way her fingers trembled just once when I kissed the inside of her knee. I could still feel her everywhere. She didn't come back that night. The apartment grew darker, quieter, heavier. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the door to open, for her keys to rattle, for her weight to shift the mattress beside me. But the silence stayed whole, unbroken. My hand drifted across the sheets, searching for heat, and found only cool cotton. I began to wonder if I had misread something, if the way she lingered, touched, stayed, if it had all been temporary, a moment borrowed, never meant to last. I had let her in, let her fill my spaces, and now she was gone, leaving behind nothing but the imprint of her body and the residue of her mouth. My throat tightened. My chest pulsed with something close to grief, but not quite. It was too raw, too strange. I didn't sleep. I drifted in and out, body taut, mind replaying everything in fevered loops. Her skin, her voice in my ear, her hips between my legs, the pressure of her fingers. I woke again and again in sweat, aching, empty. At dawn, I stood at the window, watching the pale light bleed over the buildings. The city looked unchanged, but I wasn't. The next day, she returned. She let herself in with a key I hadn't given her, but I didn't ask. She placed her bag down like nothing had happened, opened the fridge, drank from my glass, and then walked into the bedroom where I stood frozen, barefoot, unsure. Her eyes met mine and said everything. She wasn't here to explain. She was here to continue, to take more, to leave more behind. That night, she kissed me again, slower this time. Her mouth was softer, but her hands were firmer. We undressed each other in silence, every movement measured. She slid onto the bed without a word, pulled me down with her, and made me feel like I had always belonged beneath her. When I came, it was quieter, deeper, a trembling surrender I hadn't known I was still holding back. She stayed the whole night, wrapped around me like a question I hadn't answered. And when I woke the next morning, she was still there. But I knew now she wouldn't always be.